good morning to you.
Good morning, Harriet.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
Now, when the news, first of all, hit, what was your immediate reaction?
Not surprising, but a bit confused in the sense that the term was coming to an end in November, and this is August, so why doing ahead of time? However, this is a new administration, and they have the three pillars: one, fighting insurgency, fighting corruption, and re-stimulating the economy. So the sequence of events must be determined by the executive themselves, and so they must know some things that the ordinary man does not know, and so that must be the rationale for doing it ahead of schedule.
Remember that AMCON was constituted just about the time, was about a year after or so, yes, after the intervention, the August 14 intervention yes, in the banking sector. And so it came up to, take care of all those non-performing loans, yeah, and the rest of it for the banks. And so AMCON over the years under Mustafa Chike-Obi, how would you rate it?
Okay, let's go back a little bit. There are three levels for dealing with financial institutions. One is policy, central bank. The other one is regulation, central bank, as well as NDIC. And then the other one is stabilizers, which is AMCON. AMCON was set up to buy toxic assets and at a discount, warehouse them, and then sell them back into the market. It's just like all other institutions, the toxic asset relief program in the US, in Ireland, and other countries. So this happened at the time of the global crisis. Now, after about 4 years, AMCON was asked to stop. AMCON actually stopped buying toxic assets about 2 years ago. AMCON met all the obligations. In terms, they issued bonds and met the obligations to the holders of the bonds, and the central bank took over about 6 trillion naira of AMCON assets, AMCON paper in the central bank at about 6%. That is where we stand. AMCON, to all intents and purposes, had been mothballed and had rendered inactive. Because there was a feeling that the banking system was stable and there was no systemic risks. However, oil prices have come down in the last 12 months by about 55%, trading at 46, and could be going lower. There is a correlation between the fall in oil prices, the adjustment of the currency, followed by systemic risk in the banking system.
The banking sector.
So it's only a question of time before we begin to see some jitters in the banking sector. If this is to happen, then the new AMCON will have to go back again and start buying assets. And the question is the new AMCON in a position to do this, considering the overhang of the previous assets that have been bought? So you have to ask yourself, AMCON has 4,000 clients, right? What is the state of those clients? Are they meeting their obligations? If AMCON itself is having difficulty in collecting its money from this market, then where will the money come from to buy new toxic assets if the need arises? So those will be the challenges. But looking at the personalities themselves, quite clear. The outgoing team were well reputed, and their time is over. For some reason, they've been taken out earlier than scheduled, and that must be for reasons best known to the government. But the new team are a safe pair of hands. I happen to know 3 of the people there. I know Mr. Kuru used to be in Habib Bank and was in Enterprise. I know Mr. Ayeye, knew him in the Oceanic Bank, and previously had worked in the same place as I did. And I also know Mr. Ismail Aminu, who used to be at FSB and was in oil and energy, and UBA as well. Those are tried and tested hands, and I think they will be able to cope with the existing and potential challenges that will come up.
Now, do you think that AMCON under Chike-Obi went outside its initial mandate of banking sector intervention and into aviation and oil and gas, because it did that a couple of times?
No. The point is this, that the aviation sector is strategic to the country. It's of national importance. So if, for example, you were to stop the airlines because they couldn't meet their obligations, and nobody could fly around Nigeria, or those who were flying with second-rate carriers, and then we lost people and all of that, it will be a problem. So the intervention in the aviation sector was in national strategic interest rather than just financial considerations.
Yeah, well, you see, AMCON was actually set up for the banks primarily.
Yeah, to buy assets. The assets they bought, these loans, the banks sold the aviation-related loans to AMCON. And then they became AMCON clients. At that point in time, the airlines themselves needed additional funding. And so AMCON, as their new lender, had to provide that in national interest. If the airlines themselves did not behave themselves properly and diverted some of that money into other uses, it becomes another issue. AMCON's enforcement, AMCON monitoring could have been less than professional. But the objective of supporting airlines, which carry in all maybe about 12 million passengers across the country, safely in the past couple of years, is not something that we should ignore, because the alternative is to have unsafe skies, not only for those in the aircraft, but even those on the ground.
So now, do you think that this new team headed by Ahmed Kuru should also be looking at, towing that same line, buying off those bad loans or bad loans, yes, from the banks with regards to whether the aviation, oil and gas?
Well, let me put it this way. There are two elements. There's one, what the assets they have. If AMCON was to sell its shares today, that is holding as collateral, in a stock market, you just talked to Rotimi Fakayojo, the stock market is could below 30,000, right? If AMCON was to sell heavily into that market, what will happen to the stock market? Come further down, right? If AMCON was to sell properties that they hold in a property market where there's a 54% vacancy factor already in Ikoyi and Lekki, the values of those properties are going to come lower. If AMCON was to sell their tank farms, which they hold, at this time, so the timing of the sell side of AMCON is one thing. Then AMCON to buy assets, because the banks are going to be facing difficulty, already have liquidity issues. If AMCON was to go in and buy, then they will have to do that, but they need funding. Where will the funding come from? Is the funding adequate? And can the central bank provide that additional funding at this time? So you're asking very, very important questions. The reality is that, again, let's segregate the functions into two. Can this new team stabilize and keep things good? Yes, they can. Can this new team face the challenges ahead? First and foremost, you have to understand what are these challenges going to be and whether the capacity to deal with that is there. I have no doubt that they can. However, the real challenge is when we know the magnitude of the problems that are going to come. If oil settles at $40 a barrel, both at the fiscal level, the external reserve level, the currency level, the banking system level, there are going to be challenges. And I don't want us to underestimate the amount of turbulence that we have coming in the next few months.
But already we've seen some of those challenges. Remember, the banks have already started publishing the names of delinquent debtors.
Yes.
So that's one thing that I know that AMCON is already having on its table fresh for them to deal with. But going forward, and banks are still having issues with liquidity, you already mentioned that as well. How do you think that this team should tackle it?
First and foremost, the team has to agree. Of these 4,000 clients of AMCON, those that are in default, they will have to publish those names. So that is double default. First and foremost, you are in default with the banks. That's why the bank sold you to AMCON. Then you are in default again at AMCON, which means that, double jeopardy. Are those things going to be restructured? Are those guys going to be taken out of the system altogether? So when that is done, number one. Number two, are you going to restructure some of those debts at AMCON right now? Because they were in default in the banks, taken over by AMCON, default in AMCON, restructure. Then, finally, the banks dealing with new challenges. Is AMCON going to be able to bring up 2 trillion, let us say, for example, 2 trillion naira to buy toxic assets? I don't think that AMCON at this time, or the central bank at this time, can find 2 trillion naira in addition to start buying assets. So what is going to happen? The central bank is going to intensify its examination and supervision functions. They're going to emphasize risk management at all levels of the banking system. They're going to use AMCON or whatever is the resources they have to try and stabilize this. So it will be a consolidated approach to minimizing risk rather than escalating risk.
But now, still talking about the amount of risk that we have in the banking sector, we remember that about 6 years ago now, there was an intervention into the banking sector when there was serious toxic assets that AMCON had to be established. But do you think that in 6 years that has abated in any way?
No. Okay. I think we need to go back a little bit.
Yes, we do.
6 years was intervention. But before that, 2 years ahead of that, there was a currency devaluation from 118 to 155. So typically what happens, there was an oil price decline, currency adjustment, banking system failure. We've gone another 5 years because the history shows that 5 years of currency stability, adjustment, after adjustment, banking system crisis, and then you take over again. So we are at that point. Oil prices are down again. Currency has adjusted 26% from 155 to 199. What next? Banking system turbulence. Now, we succeeded in holding things stable for 5 years, which is a normal pattern. We are now dealing with a new challenge. Can we do it? I think that the amount of adjustment and the amount of crisis that we are going to have this time is going to be less than what we had in 2008 because of the fact that some of those measures taken in 2008 have been successful.
Let's hold on to that thought. And when we come back, we'll actually look at, if there's really any unfinished business since August 14, 2009.
There is unfinished business.
So we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.